we have been studying Psalms. We're studying Hebrews, but we also wanted to study Psalms. So every Sunday we'll start with a psalm. And Psalms are a collection of ancient poems, and it's one of the largest collection of poems in the Bible. The psalm that I'm going to do today is Psalm number 1. And Psalm number 1 is a reflection of two different paths that we can take as humans, leading to different ways of living. Psalm 1 reveals that we choose to, whatever we choose to meditate on makes all the difference. One path leads to a flourishing and abundant life, and the other path leads to ruin. Okay. One path, a person is like a blossoming tree of life planted by a stream, and the other one is like a chaff of wheat that's blown in the wind. And so I've also been talking with you all a little bit about the Bible Project. So many of you are familiar with the Bible Project, and we've got the information up here on that. Psalm number 1, it happens to be one of the Psalms that the Bible Project reviews. And since there are only 2 or 3 Psalms that the Bible Project reviews, I'm going to try to play it for you today. Their explanation takes about 5 minutes, I think. And if it doesn't work, we'll just read it and go another way. But I'm going to try to share it with you. You never know with technology. Screen sharing is paused. Up it again. I'm going to try it again. Okay, start there.
The biblical book of Psalms is a collection of ancient Israelite poems.
The first poem in this collection is Psalm 1.
Psalm 1 is a reflection on 2 different ways of being human. There's the person who's like a blossoming tree of life planted by a stream. Then there's the person who's like chaff that's blown away in the wind.
The poem begins, "Blessed is the man who." But what does that even mean, to be blessed?
Well, when we see the word bless in our Bibles, it could be translating one of 2 different Hebrew words. There's Baruch, which describes a person who's experiencing God's favor and abundance in their lives. This usually gets translated as blessed. But Psalm 1 begins with a different word, Ashrei. This word refers to what people say about a person who is Baruch. It's a way to express how desirable and good it is when someone experiences God's blessing. It's like saying, hey, that person over there, they have the good life.
So it could be translated, "Oh, the good life of the man."
Exactly. And that good life results from 3 choices this person makes.
It's the man who doesn't walk by the counsel of the wicked, doesn't stand in the path of sinners, and doesn't sit in the seat of mockers.
Notice the progression here. The man goes from walking, then to standing, then to sitting.
It's a progression from movement towards becoming stuck.
Right. And these 3 words are 3 destructive ways of being human that you can get trapped in. So the wicked is a kind of person who's morally backwards. They think that evil is good and good is evil. Sinner is a word that refers to missing the target. And in the Bible, the target is loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. So sin is a failure to love others well. And the mocker is somebody who can't even appreciate goodness or beauty anymore. They're so jaded, all they can do is show contempt for anything that's not like themselves.
So this is an invitation to stop and meditate on how our choices slowly shape us over time.
Right. And speaking of meditating, that's where the poem goes next. Rather, his delight is in the instruction of Yahweh. And on his instruction, he meditates day and night. That word instruction is the Hebrew word Torah, which means God's teaching or wisdom. And notice the symmetry of this sentence. He delights.
Oh, it's working.
Our trial is over.
Running.
They were saying in church today that.
It switched from
We're
actually
letting up that sometimes they didn't work. You were having trouble working on getting your child signed up.
Oh, yeah, but that's different.
It's your attention,
That's-
so that these words become part of you.
And that kind of meditation is the pathway to the good life.
150.
Apparently, let's read on.
And he will become like a tree planted by streams of water, which gives its fruit in its time, and its leaf does not wither. And everything he does, he makes it successful.
So earlier in the poem, there was a planting yourself that leads to ruin, but through meditating on God's instruction, you can plant yourself in a way that brings life. And notice all the Garden of Eden language, a tree growing by streams of water, abundant fruit, leaves that never wither.
This is like being a tree of life.
Yes, when humans meditate on and live by God's instruction, they begin to taste abundant life for themselves and for others. And that's why it's called success, which links us back to the opening word, ashrei. God's wisdom leads to the good life. And with that, the poem's first part comes to a close and the second part begins.
But not so the wicked. Rather, he is like chaff that the wind drives away.
So notice the contrast. One kind of person is like a tree firmly planted, full of fruit, while the other person is like an empty husk of wheat that flakes off and blows away.
Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous.
Remember, the meditator decides not to stand in the path of sinners, and that contrasts now with the wicked who are unable to stand when God brings justice.
Because Yahweh knows the path of the righteous, but the path of the wicked will perish.
And so we end where we begin, choosing between two paths, two ways of being human that lead to flourishing life or withering ruin.
And the difference is about what you meditate on.
Yeah, this poem and all of God's instruction are designed for a lifetime of meditation, reading and rereading slowly, allowing it to guide all of our choices. And the result is to become a tree of life for others.
That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. We should do that for all the songs. I bet there's like all of that depth in all of the songs that I've never seen before. That's wonderful.
So we can talk a little bit about here, one of the other commentaries that I looked at said, blessed are those who delight in the word of God or the teaching of God. If David loved the brief writings that then constituted God's word, how much more should we love that word, which has now been brought to completion and headed up by Christ? And that's a little bit about what we've been talking about in Hebrews. Okay. Jesus was very fond of the Psalms. He knew them by heart, and he often mentioned and quoted the Psalms. We remember in Matthew 27, where he quotes Psalm 22, my God, why have thou forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? And in Luke, into your hands I commit my spirit, deliver me, Lord, my faithful God. Our Psalms. And then also he said in Luke, he said many things in the Psalms were written of me. He said to them, this is what I told you while I was still with you. Everything must be fulfilled that is written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. So,
as I'm listening to this, it's just like, I was thinking about my friends and specifically like my friends on Facebook. And it's like, there's my friends who are positive and, full of energy and full of like just sharing the love. And then there's my friends that are trying to break things down. And we all have anger. There's no question. We all have anger and frustration and struggle with the world. But, when you decide to spend so much of your energy targeting and ridiculing those others that you don't understand, and it's like I'm just thinking particularly of those that like to post all of the memes about how horrible and contradictory or whatever Christians are, and I'm just like, you don't understand all of us in the first place. I will
Well, and that's,
you for some people, and it's like other people, and I'm more likely to unfollow the Christians that I find to be not Christian than I am to unfollow the people that are struggling with the fact that there are people who behave in unchristian ways in the world. Because at least they're trying to live their life. It's just their focus is in the wrong place.
it's what do we meditate on in your mind constantly? Is it the positive and loving ways that we can live our life? Or is it finding fault and negativity and highlighting that as a part of your life?
Philippians tells us, whatever things are good, whatever things are right, things are beautiful, whatever things are good, think on these things, and the peace of God that passes all understanding, put your hearts and minds. I know when I went to Vietnam and got my luggage stolen, and I was supposed to be there for a year, and I had my backpack, and I'm sitting in the room in Hanoi thinking, is this where I'm supposed to be, Lord? And being so anxious about being there and wanting to go home, and realizing that, literally realizing that God had spent 42 years packing what I needed to take that trip inside me, that there was nothing in that duffel bag that wasn't ephemeral. And so I stayed for a year with the backpack, and I just spent the rest of that evening, and I laughed, singing all the songs I remembered as a child from church. I was like singing hymns and songs, because if he knows the hair, if he knows consider the lilies, surely he knew where I was, and that I was not going to be alone there. And so, I think about that so often when I get anxious, which my husband can testify is one of the things I work with.
Know what you were doing there.
That's gonna make you laugh, as my husband says, I won one of the top 50 teachers in the United States, and they gave me a year sabbatical to go anywhere I wanted. And I wanted to go to Vietnam. Wow. And so I spent a year in a small village outside of Luang Prabang in Laos, and taught in that village for a year, of course. That's very cool.
I wanted to know what second prize was.
My wife is always teaching, or always saying, I would be mad about this or something in some situation that, why do you put up with it? And she says, I just choose not to be angry. I choose not to carry bitterness. It just ruins you, so I just
It's not
don't
because
carry it.
people have power
Yeah.
over your life. Because you make the decision to let them affect. That's the thing I tell myself over and over again when I get anxious. You're letting someone else determine the course of your day, of your life.
Mhm.
Give the control back to God. Give the control back.
And that's what sounds like.
That's what I was thinking about when you were reading. I was thinking, you had a name for me.
the reason this song is so important is that earlier this year, if I hold my hands up, y'all will see some shaking in my hands. And for the longest kind of time, I didn't know what that was. I couldn't hold a plate in his hand without it dropping on the floor or glass. Back in about March, they did an MRI on me, and I am in the early stages of Parkinson's. And I think the reason the songs mean so much to me, particularly one, the 23rd song, is because I was scared to death when they said that. And I think the reason that the 23rd song is come more and more back to me with that is that I now understand, Lord, you are my shepherd. You are leading me through this. Do it. You done, and then I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to reach my dead and my shadow of death. And you know, whatever point it happens where I can't do what I can do. And pitch my tent and stay there, you will bring me all the way through it.
It's a lot of strength.
Yeah.
Kevin, you were wanting to say something, I think.
What?
Oh, I thought Kevin was wanting to say something before. No.
Well, I was scared to death with that diagnosis. Because I know what Parkinson's is, and I know the end of the road. And I don't know whether you all saw the paper earlier this week, but one of the state legislators, Jennifer Wexon, came out with her diagnosis of Parkinson's. And what a beautiful story she told, because she said, I don't want your self-pity. I don't want you feeling sorry for me.
This dialogue and all we just listened to, it's pretty much talking about one of the laws of the universe, which is the law of attraction. Like attracts into itself that which it is. And that's what he's talking about. You know, where you choose to put your focus is what you're going to draw to you. As far as what he was talking about, sinners and everything, kind of falls in line with what my belief is on sin. You know, I believe that sin is anything that supports a belief in separation between you and source. Yeah. So, and that's, you know, I caught that when he said that, but pretty much he's talking about the law of attraction.
Okay. I can't emphasize enough the Bible Project this summer. If you have a chance to go on and listen to some of the things, there's a whole series on in Hebrews. We're talking right now, chapters 5 through 7. We've been, well, just within Hebrews, there really are two main goals. And one of those is to elevate Jesus among these people that he's writing, though the sermon's being written for, as superior to anything before him, showing that Jesus is worthy of all of our trust and devotion. And there's a second goal, is to challenge the readers, the people of that time, to remain faithful to Jesus despite being persecuted. And so we've seen in chapters 1 and 2, we've talked about comparing Jesus to the angels and the Torah, and 3 and 4, Moses and the promised land. And then in 5 through 7, he talks about comparing Jesus with the priests and mentions Melchizedek. Okay, and so we've gone through chapters 5 and 6, and we're just beginning chapter 7 there with the Melchizedek, and then 8 and 10 we'll go into talking about another comparison of Jesus' sacrifice and the new covenant there. So in chapter 5 through 7, the author was comparing Jesus to Israel's priests from the line of Aaron and say, but Jesus is the ultimate priest. Okay, and as we were studying Psalm 110 within the last couple of weeks, where that famous line is what? Does anyone remember? Jesus is a priest in the order of Melchizedek. Jesus is a priest in order of Melchizedek. Okay, so we're in chapter 7, we're going to be talking a little bit more about him, about not cheese.
I thought it was
Melchizedek. So we ended last week, Sarah, the last 2 verses of chapter 6. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain, where our forerunner Jesus has entered on our behalf. He has become a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Okay. And so now we're going to move on to chapter 7 and learn a little bit more about this guy. So would someone like to read chapter 7, 1 through 10?
I can do that, even though I'm still at home.
Oh, she always does it
All right,
first.
Sarah can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the short shall go first. This King Melchizedek of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham as he was returning from defeating the kings and blessed him. And to him Abraham apportioned 1/10 of everything. His name, in the first place, means King of Righteousness. Next, he is also King of Salem, that is, King of Peace. Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. See how great he is. Even Abraham the patriarch gave him 1/10 of the spoils. And those descendants of Levi who receive the priestly office have a commandment in the law to collect tithes from the people, that is, from their kindred, though these are also descended from Abraham. But this man, who does not belong to their ancestry, collected tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had received the promises. It is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. In the one case, tithes are received by those who are mortal. In the other, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him.
Okay. This comes from the story of Melchizedek comes from Genesis 14, 17 through 20.
Oh, I remember this one. I remember this one. Abraham goes and he gets blessed by Melchizedek, and that's the first point where Abraham is actually considered like the anointed or something. I mean, but it's something specific about.
Yeah. It reads, after Abram returned from defeating Kedorlaomer and the kings allied with him, the king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is King's Valley. Then Melchizedek, king of Shalem, is how they say to pronounce it, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. So he's a priest of the same God.
And that's the first time we hear God Most High in the Bible, right?
I don't know.
I
but-
think so.
Okay. And blessed Abram, saying, blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hands. Then Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. Okay, now prior to Moses, sacrifices were offered by the heads of the family. Remember, we don't have the priests. Okay, and it usually is the oldest living male in the paternal line of the family. As families grew to be tribes, the head became, the head came to be king of the tribe as well as the priest, so they were like a king priest. Okay, so that would be more like Melchizedek, king priest. In the days of Moses, when the tribes had grown into a nation, the nation was organized and there was a place set up separately for a sacrifice, and there was a ritual established, and a special heredity order of men was created from the family of Levi to do the sacrifices and be the priests. So another family for, and there was one family for being a priest, and there was another family for kings, like David's family was for kings. So one family supplied kings and one family supplied priests, but Christ was both, combining the office of king and priest, like Melchizedek. Okay, so it was before. And when you hear him say, without father or mother or whatever up here, that's when we were talking last week about, Melchizedek. They said he didn't have a father or a mother or whatever, but they said, well, it was probably tied in with this new way of heredity being a priest, whereas before, regardless of who his father or mother was, he was a high priest and king. So Melchizedek was recognized a priest, even though the origin of his priesthood wasn't known, which after Moses, the tribes were established, it was. So he's this mysterious figure.
Well, it's sort of like, I don't know, it's like you can think of it in terms of like King Henry. It's like King Henry VIII, he's king, but then he makes himself also high priest of England when he creates the English church. But it's, and obviously Henry VIII is a whole different range of issues, but
It's a bad habit.
the concept of king who is also the high priest, that makes, we've seen that. And in this case with Jesus, it's a whole different world of king who is high priest, because he's priest first, but he's from the line of kings. And his central role to us has been priest. He's not trying to control us. He's not trying to rule us by setting us up into his little kingdoms and stuff. It's while he does, it's all a spiritual kingdom, and that's the message he speaks and hammers throughout the Gospels is that he's trying to bring us to a spiritual kingdom, not an earthly kingdom.
Yeah, in the Bible Project, there is a series of theme videos on the royal priest, and it starts with has 5 or 6 different videos, and it talks about how when the story of the Garden of Eden, and where humans were developed there to be priests, but then they didn't do so well. Okay, and then so they fell, and so that priesthood was never established. And it's talking about, it goes through that part, and then it talks about Abram and Melchizedek, and about that kind of a priest, the high priest there, and then Moses and Aaron, and then David, the priestly king, and then Jesus, the royal priest, and then the royal priesthood, where heaven on earth, the kingdom, God's kingdom on earth, is where we are again as Christians, supposed to be a part of that priesthood. Okay, that way of sharing Christ's word and sharing that kind of bringing the word and spreading it around the whole world. And that's what Christ allowed the world to do with forgiveness, to be able to allow us to get that priesthood again.
Which is why we get to pray directly to God,
Right.
because curtain was torn, and we now have become the order of priests also, and we can go before God ourselves and say whatever it is we need to say.
And one of the tenets of the disciple church, so to speak, is that I grew up with was the priesthood of all believers. And that's,
Baptist too.
yeah, oh, good, all right.
Yeah, and I think that's common within the Protestant, churches. We can go, and that's a beautiful thing, like that Martin Luther and the Calvinists all came, it's like we can go directly to God. We do not need a priest to intercede. And it's like Jesus is there. If you want to pray to Jesus, that's fine, because Jesus is part of the Trinity. But we can go directly to God with our request.
And you don't have to pay anybody.
And we don't have to pay anything, we don't need an
To get out of
intermediary.
hell.
We don't need somebody to advocate on our behalf, because we already have someone advocating on our behalf every moment.
So one of the things that I found kind of interesting was they mentioned that he was the priest and king in Shalem. And,
Yeah.
you know what that is?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
Oh.
Okay, so he was priest of Shalem, which is an ancient name short for Jerusalem, which will later become the capital of Abram's future family, where the temple's built. Okay, and so Abram gives him the 10%, like the Israelites will be giving, to their priests. So he's a small figure in writing, but he's a large figure in the royal priesthood description, that's throughout the Old Testament and into the New Testament with Christ. Any other thoughts about that passage? So we're going to read the next passage, which is 11 through 28. It's a little long. Someone want to?
The one thing I would say, it is kind of interesting to me that if I read this correctly, Melchizedek is not Jewish.
No, he wasn't.
So, but it's interesting that the Jewish people hold him in such reverence,
And he's the first to bring the concept of God Most High, to have the name, was it Elohim? As God Most High, and the name for God Most High enters their lexicon at that moment. And Abraham becomes anointed at that moment. It's a very important moment in Jewish tradition. Yeah.
So he was really
And you-
first to bring God Most High.
Yeah.
And believe it was the same God as
Yes, as the
Abraham,
Jewish God.
Right.
before
Yeah.
Abraham.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Now if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for the people received the law under this priesthood, what further need would there have been to speak of another priest arising according to the order of Melchizedek, rather than one according to the order of Aaron? For when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. Now the one of whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe, from which no one else has ever served at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah. And in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. It is even more obvious when another priest arises resembling Melchizedek, one who has become a priest, not through the legal requirement concerning physical descent, but through the power of an indestructible life. For it is attested of him, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. There is, on the one hand, an abrogation of an earlier commandment because it was weak and ineffectual, for the law made nothing perfect. There is, on the other hand, an introduction of a better hope through which we approach God. This was confirmed with an oath for others who became priests, took their office without an oath. But this one became a priest with an oath because of the one who said to him, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever." Accordingly, Jesus has also become the guarantee of a better covenant. Furthermore, the former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But he holds the priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able for all time to save those who approach God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. For it was fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, blameless, undefiled, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. Unlike the other high priests, he has no need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins, and then for those of the people. This he did once for all when he offered himself. For the law appoints as high priests those who are subject to weakness, but the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever.
So it starts out with the first two verses saying that the Jewish priests that have been established are imperfect and insufficient to take away sin. That they were priests solely based on a certain family, you know, belonging to a certain family. So regardless of their spiritual qualifications. Okay. It had been foretold that the covenant under which the Levitical priests function would be superseded by another covenant with a different priesthood. And I was trying to see that they're going to talk about that in chapter, we talk about chapter 8 a little bit.
But the order of Melchizedek really predates the order of the Levites.
Right, but it starts out, if perfection could have been attained through the Levitical priesthood, then, and indeed the law given to people established that priesthood, why should there be a need for another, you know, kind of a thing, so.
But he does go on to say that, there are people from the tribe of Levi. There were many, many more than there were from the Melchizedek priesthood. But let's look at it all of them have died.
Right,
None have come back. So there was only one need for one to come for the priesthood of Jesus, because not only did he die,
right.
but he came back to be a priest forever.
And Christian ministers in the New Testament are never called priests. In the New Testament, there's no need for any other priest. We've got our high priest. They're called teachers or ministers.
Isn't it so interesting that the Catholic Church was set up in the structure that it was, knowing all of this?
The priests offered animal sacrifices, and they ended with the death of Christ. So this one commentator says, to apply priest to a Christian minister is to revert to that which in Christ had been done away with. One thing that one of Hebrews' favorite words is eternal too. We see eternal, eternal salvation, eternal judgment, eternal redemption, spirit, inheritance, covenant, which is something that the Levitical priests can't offer. You know, it's through Christ. Let's see if there's anything else I have in there. Any other thoughts about that?
I've just stuck on that word abrogation. That's the first time I have ever seen that word in my entire life, I think.
All right, which verse was that?
It was in verse 18, abrogation, there was one hand, the abrogation of an earlier commandment because it was weak
It's-
and ineffectual. I mean, it obviously.
Yeah, mine says the former regulation is set aside.
Yes.
Because
There's a way to read that, like,
Right,
or
and mine
write that,
translates canceled.
yeah,
So the,
so,
the
word
earlier
alone made nothing perfect.
okay.
And a better hope is introduced by which we draw near to God.
Okay, so your interpretation says canceled. What does your interpretation use the word as,
which one does yours use, Susan?
We're
18.
set aside.
set aside, set aside?
Yeah, it's
Weak and useless.
legal.
Yeah, because abrogation, it seems like it's a specific word that the NRSV has chosen that means something more and maybe all of this.
Or deconstruction.
Deconstruction. It's just, I feel like
Get
it's
a new
like.
vocabulary word.
Yeah, it's like, I want to understand
Okay.
why.
Your challenge is to spell it and then use it in a complete sentence.
I was not spelling before.
So we have, Melchizedek blessing Abram. Abram, failing to, with regard to the priest or high priest, Abram had his faults with God, okay? Later, it talks about the different people who, everyone always, even getting down to David. You know, David had his problems, you know, with God, so they all failed in the end to be any kind of a level of a high priest to take away sins. And in many cases, in many cases, like Moses said, I will die as a substitute for the people. David said, I will die for as a substitute to bring take away sin from my people. But none of them were able to do that, and it's through Christ that you get that. And so if you do have a chance this next week, you might want to take a look at that, the themes in the Bible Project on the priest, the high priest, and how it kind of works its way from the Garden of Eden all the way to Christ and then to us. In that respect, it's really very interesting videos. I watched them and took a few notes, but I think that you see through the video today, I really like the way that they kind of explain things. It seems to make more sense to me when I hear their explanations on the Bible Project.